sta attento che passa chi a pagare.
Che gli è successo? Perché si comporta così?
E che ne so, pure stamattina è passato così, pareva la statua della libertà, non ha guardato in faccia a nessuno.
La vittima! A caso pietoso! Ma oramai mi avete stufato, azzozzi col culo!
Ma come sei proseguo? Trova un lavoro, Akatone. Clearly, narrators can never be safe from the actions of their characters, nor can a narrator's voice be devoid of the influence of the created. This idea that a story's truth is subordinate to the persuasion of the author has been tackled with throughout Italian literature and film since the 17th century. This video investigates the push to remove the influence of the author's voice within Italian art as a way to shed light on the areas of society that are unrepresented and shunned. Authors have been aware of the presence of their subjectivity within their writing for centuries. The first Italian author to significantly highlight this concept was Giovanni Boccaccio in the 14th century. As we discussed in class, Boccaccio was aware of the author's ability to manipulate readers with their writing, and he emphasizes this idea via the meta-narrative structure of the Decameron. He employed this structure to position the storyteller, or narrator, directly in front of his readers to make it easier for them to understand the narrator's influence on the story's content. Boccaccio utilized this structure to relate to and convey the ideas present within the people in the wake of the Black Death. To authentically portray their lived experiences, Boccaccio emphasizes the author's presence to highlight the inherent subjectivity in their creation. This idea was furthered with Alessandro Manzoni's novel The Betrothed in 1860, which innovated the romantic novel by including peasants as the protagonists. He emphasized the common person in order to describe their conditions and promote a nationalist sentiment as a way to protest the invading Austrians. The narrator maintained a strong presence within the novel. However, the choice of the protagonist conveyed that Manzoni tried to provide a more authentic description of the underrepresented sex of society. This goal, albeit similar to Boccaccio's, is distinct in its placement of the narrator, choosing to instead depict more authentic characters. The next influence to this topic was from Émile Zola, who developed the naturalism movement in the end of the 19th century. As described by critics, naturalism presents forms of human experience not spoken of before, the physiological aspect of human behavior, sexuality, and poverty. Ultimately, this formally describes the stance Boccaccio and Manzoni incited during their times. In a preface to one of his novels, Zola states he wanted to explain how a family, a small group of regular people, behaves in society. This statement highlights his goal of authentically depicting human experience. However, this purpose is muddied by the subjectivity of the author. To tackle this problem and continue Zola's ideology, writers such as Giovanni Verga and Luigi Capuana developed the Verismo movement. The movement's aim was to scientifically analyze human documents and express the objective realities of the poor following the effects of the Risorgimento at the end of the 19th century. Verismo evolved from Zola's naturalism because, as the critic Martin Greenberg describes, it is the way of brevity, and abruptness aiming at absolute impersonality. Its use of third person is the free, indirect discourse, the thoughts, sentiments, and the intentions of the characters, which is meant to free them of the creator's control. Ultimately, Verismo is understood as a form of moral realism which fully acknowledges the pluralism and heterogeneity of the modern moral experience. Within Verismo, the narrator's voice is still present. However, it is written to, as objectively as possible, describe the conditions of the poor, common people. This marks a change as authors are now attempting to remove the inherent subjectivity within writing to more authentically describe their human documents. The movement then transitioned to the film medium with the advent of neorealism, beginning with Roberto Rossellini's film Rome, Open City. From the early 1940s to the early 1950s, neorealism documented the Italian experience of war and the almost equally traumatic post-war recovery following the effects of fascism. Italian historian Sidney Gottlieb emphasizes that Verga's Verismo helped give the Italian filmmaker a model of how to take art away from the studios and give it the seriousness and truth value of philosophy and science. Unprofessional actors and lack of film studios marks this period's attempt to achieve a more authentic depiction of the common people. Instead of analyzing the human documents from an aerial scientific perspective, they lower themselves to the level of their subjects. Rossellini writes, "Modern man feels a need to tell of things as they are, to take account of reality in an uncompromisingly concrete way, which goes with today's interest in statistics and scientific results." This period marks a development that the author's perspective plays an important role in mediating the content of the art. To continue, throughout Anna Maria Ortese's writing career, she remains resolute and never compromising to suit the aesthetics and taste of the literary establishment. This individuality produced revolutionary ideas that expanded upon the neorealism movement in the 1950s and beyond. The writer Paula McGill states that Orteza's surrealist elements can be read as an acknowledgement of this tendency towards defamiliarization and estrangement. Orteza highlights the inadequacy of literary realism to describe the reality of subjective experience. Her writing challenges the assumption of neorealist fiction, questioning the notion that everything is narratable or that it can be represented without distortion. Therefore, Orteza attempted to more accurately represent living conditions by implementing the surreal aspects of life that define the human condition. She completely removes the narrator and attempts to write directly through the perspective of her characters. To come full circle, Pier Paolo Pasolini is a film director who also evolved the idea of neorealism in the 1960s with examples like Acatone. As Pasolini grew up during the neorealist movement, he felt the genre told a fairy tale, which encouraged a falsely optimistic sense of hope about the course of history. He furthered this claim by stating hope was the ideological category which presided over committed neorealism. It posited a future which was immobile and less than metahistorical, an unreliable palingenesis of man. He felt the current representation of the poor lacked an authentic retelling, and the author David Ward postulates that Pasolini apprehends and reacts against the poverty of conventional narrative codes, exposing the ideological and ontological repercussions of that poverty. Therefore, Pasolini follows in the footsteps of the previous authors by continuing to remove the influence of their bias to provide a more accurate portrayal of the lives of the impoverished. Italian artists have been grappling with the influence of a writer's voice within their own work for centuries. The idea, which was first popularized by Boccaccio, became pervasive through Italian's tumultuous history. Authors desired to express the unrepresented and unfortunate Italian communities and felt dissatisfied with the work of their predecessors. They each advanced the movement in their own way, slowly curating and perfecting the art of authentic expression by manipulating the presence of the narrator within their art.